Well, hello once again, and welcome to this edition of In Conversation. I'm David Paulson here at the Claresholm Public Library as our series of conversations with interesting folks from in and around Claresholm with great stories to tell is what In Conversation is all about. And I'm very excited today because In Conversation is just that. Here is a guy who knows everybody and knows everything because he is the editor of the Claresholm Local Press. Talking with Rob Vogt today. Rob, first of all, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me, David. Really appreciate it.
So let's, first of all, I got to tell you, this is a little weird for me because you and I, normally in this setting, you are doing the interviewing. We've probably done that 7 or 8 times, but this is the first time I've had a chance to interview you. So the shoe is on the other foot. I hope I do as good a job interviewing you as you've done with me, but it'll be fun today. Let's talk a little bit, before we get into the newspaper side, Rob, let's talk a little bit about Rob.
Okay.
And early Rob, before Claresholm. Take us back in time and give us a little insight into your growing up and where and all that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Born and raised in a mixed farm just north of Coaldale, partway between Coaldale and Picture Butte. Family were German immigrants, so we spent a lot of time speaking the German language and the German culture. Went to K-9 in a Catholic school in Coaldale, and then it was interesting, in high school, all 3 junior highs merged into one high school, so we were all able to kind of reinvent ourselves for high school. So we didn't have to be what we were in grade 9, we could be something new and something different. And that's actually what I did, and I discovered that all these friends I made, which I still have, are from that high school period. So that was a big part of it. Spent a lot of time working on the farm. We grew sugar beets, which was very labor intensive. And now that my spouse and I bought our first house, and now I'm hoeing the garden, and it's bringing back all these memories of hoeing the sugar beets. So I actually, before my dad died, I grabbed one of his sugar beet hoes, so I use that, pay tribute to him every time I get a chance to work in the garden. And then after that, I went off to I was 17, I went off to university. I was always a writer from the word go, and but my mom had always said, you can never make a living writing. So I'm not sure if you heard
Your
that.
Your mother and my mother, yeah, no kidding.
And so I studied education and at the University of Alberta, and got my education degree. And at that point, I also was working in the student residence and just fell in love with student services. So while I was working towards my degree, I was working in the residence. I was what's called a residence life assistant. I was a floor coordinator. So I learned a lot of skills and kind of pursued that for a while. After university, I worked at Lakeland College in Vermilion. I worked at University of Lethbridge, and then eventually found my way to journalism school.
You know, you and I have a lot of parallels, including Lakeland College in Vermilion, where I was a teacher, and you worked there as well. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned the writing life, that it's been a part of you from very early on. But when did it start to channel itself toward journalism?
Well, I have a few kind of cornerstone stories I like to tell about the writing life. One of them is right from a really early age, I had these notebooks, which are very similar to the ones you allude to in your author talks. And but I would write down the stats from sports events. I constantly would write down, I'd watch TV and I would write down the stats. And that slowly coalesced into sentences and then eventually into little stories about sports. Then when I was in grade 6, my best friend at the time was a fellow named David Perlich. I'm sure you know the Perlich family.
Sure do.
And and actually Dave's mom is a Sharples, and they homesteaded west of town here. So there's a lot of Claresholm connections even back when I was in grade 6. But we started writing stories and selling them to our classmates. And so the journalist, that was free writing. It was a knockoff of Star Trek, really, but we put together 25 installments, and we sold them all at $25 a piece, and we made a lot of money for a couple grade 6 students. Tony Perlich fronted all the overhead, let us use his photocopier at the auction mart and stuff, and then my first ever kind of journalistic experience was I was in grade 12, and I'd watched an episode of Front Page Challenge on CBC, And something that one of the guests said just made me so mad. I was ranting to my high school guidance counselor, and he says, "You should write to CBC." And I went, what now? Write to CBC? And he goes, "You should write them a letter and tell them that what they are doing or what they said isn't really something you agree with, and just call them out on it." So I did in his office there. He handed me a pen and paper, and I wrote it down, and I wrote this out, and he goes, "The address should be in that book." And it was a book of thousands of addresses. I found it, and he goes, "I'll mail it for you." And I said, "Okay." And unbeknownst to me, he also sent that to the Sunny South News, our local newspaper. And the next week I opened the paper, and there was my letter as a letter to the editor. And that was my first entree into journalism. And then it kind of was dormant until university. And our university was so big, our residence was probably, the whole system was about the size of Claresholm, the population. So they had a newsletter, and I started writing a weekly column for it called A View from the Chairs, because I used to loiter in this lobby of this one building, and I'd sit in these chairs, and people would always come by and ask me what my thoughts were on whatever the issue of the day was. So I would start writing these as a column. Hence my column in the local press now is called Vogt's Views, and that's a tribute to way back 30 years ago when I started that. And then, again, it lay dormant for a while, and then I came back, kind of did that thing that a lot of 20-somethings do. I didn't know what I was doing, so I moved back into my parents' basement and tried to figure out what I wanted to do, and it always came back to writing, and always came back to telling stories, because my family are not, they always say that, they're always so stunned that, how can we barely speak English, because they're all immigrants, we barely speak English, we barely write English, how do you end up being a writer? And I said, because we're all storytellers. And if you heard my dad tell a story, it was just magical sometimes. And so, again, with my mom's voice in my head about you can't make a living writing, I enrolled in journalism school at Lethbridge College, and I've never looked back. It was just this amazing experience. I did my first year of core courses, it was the first time I'd ever gone to school, and everything had a purpose that we were learning in class. Everything had a goal, a purpose. It was all building towards something else. And I finished my first year. I was supposed to do a practicum. I didn't know what that was going to look like. And then out of the blue, I got a phone call from the Lethbridge Herald, and they said, "Can you come do some freelance writing for us?" And I said, "Okay, what kind?" "You worked in student services, so I would like you to do a series of articles on student issues for the Student Survival Guide." So while I was doing those, I got another unsolicited phone call, and it was from Jack Murphy, who became a mentor to me, but he owned the McLeod Gazette. And he said, "Can you come work for me? I phoned your instructors, and they gave me your name." So I went to work that summer for the McLeod Gazette, and covering everything under the sun. It started with South Country Fair and American Legion baseball tournament, and then there was a big grass fire, and there was just so much stuff. So we hit the ground running, and I instantly knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I spent the rest of I went back to college in the fall, took my entire second year of school, and at the same time I worked full-time for the McLeod Gazette. So again, fascinating to be able to take the lessons from what I learned in class and put them right into my job, and take what I was learning from my job in discussion and talk to my classmates and say, this is actually what we're doing, or I wish I knew this, or I'm glad we're learning about this. And then I just sailed on into, when I graduated, into that job.
So now, okay, so now you're in journalism. You're actually putting what you're learning to work, and then eventually you get to Claresholm. Take us through that little journey.
Well, that was another really interesting experience. So I was working for Jack Murphy, who was a mentor to me, and but he'd been working for and owned the newspaper for a long time, and he'd been working at it since he was virtually a teenager, and so he wanted to sell it, and so he sold it, and unfortunately the new ownership was making some changes, and so they said, "Well, we'd love to keep you on, but we just don't have the resources to be able to do that, so we're sorry." And I went, "Okay." But instantly just up the road. I always joke it's the shortest commute, it's the shortest distance between two workplaces in our industry. There's this opening, just came up at the Claresholm Local Press. And Jack Murphy said, "You say the word and I'll give him a call." And I said, "I'm saying the word." Right now I needed to make a living, I needed to pay rent. And so Jack phoned them and I went for an interview. And I also really wanted to make sure that I could close out my time at the Gazette. So I said, if possible, I didn't want to leave him in the lurch. I wanted to, he kind of gave me my start, so I wanted to walk out the doors with him together, which we did. And my last day at the Gazette was September 5th, and my first day at the Claresholm Local Press was September 10th, 2001, the day before the world changed.
Holy cow.
And that in itself was memorable for so many different reasons. Primarily, we worked late Monday nights. We used to put the paper together, so I worked late that night. My very first, we call it production, and we put the paper together. We put it to bed. I slept in a little bit. I woke up in my brand new apartment in Claresholm, and all of a sudden, there's a tower on fire. One's come down, and it was just surreal. And then heard that there was this plane crash, and I never even occurred to me that a plane could fly into the tower, much less be intentional, and that being an act of terrorism. And it was just surreal. So I spent the first week I worked here doing stories on the impact of 9/11 on our community. And there was no better way to meet so many different people, because we talked to the schools about, well, what are the students going through right now? Because this is off the scale for current events and news and anything. And met the town council, talked to the churches, asked them how were they coping with church members who were probably going through stress and anxiety. And there were events that were being canceled because the planes had stopped. And it was that moment where everybody can tell you where they were.
Yes.
And that happened to be my second day of work at the Claresholm Local Press.
That is an amazing story. Yeah. But something that I've noticed, because I've worked with people at weekly newspapers for a very long time. And what I've found is that people at weekly newspapers are usually on the move. It's a temporary stop here until I get my big journalism job at a daily, or maybe I move into a bigger weekly paper. But you have stayed at Claresholm since 2001, so we're looking at 20 years, big anniversary coming up in a couple of months for you. Yeah. So how did that, why is it, Rob, wanting to leave, and why is this the place that you have chosen?
Variety of reasons. It's a really good question, because I used to get asked that a lot, and I likened it to my basic answer used to be, it's because this is what I want to do and what I like doing, and I'm going to keep doing it. And then one day I was talking to a friend of mine who's a school teacher, because a lot of my friends finished university, and the ones who were able to find jobs have stayed in the profession. And he said to me, he was telling me how people were asking him, well, how come you never want to be a principal and move into administration? And he goes, I don't think that's necessarily always for everyone. I don't think you're bettering yourself necessarily for moving up through the chain. Sometimes people just want to teach because that's their profession, that's their vocation. And that's kind of what my approach is to. This is my vocation. This is what I want to do. And I, over time, have developed this philosophy that it's not just, you can go out and see the world, but in this job, the world can come to me. And I can see the world through other people's eyes. Like yourself, many of the interviews we've done about various things you've observed. But I've met cancer survivors. I've met Olympians. I've met the Premier of Alberta. The 5 of the last 6 of them have come through here or through this job. Politicians, but also spiritual leaders. I've met just cancer survivors, and some of the best stories are the ones of just triumph, of just this amazing experience, like just sharing someone's fight for life with waiting for a kidney transplant and then getting that transplant, and then how their life just absolutely changed, or a liver transplant, or a new drug, experimental drug that saved someone's life, or someone beaten cancer, or someone like, pardon me, one of the interesting things about where we're at, by virtue of being on a highway, is we have so many people coming through town too, raising money for causes or for these important things like a variety of different of causes, including the one that's going to be coming up on Friday, right? Is the next in the long line, right? So I like to think that I've always wanted to tell stories, and this has given me the venue and the ability to do that. And I don't want to do it anywhere else because I just don't. This is, there's an old saying that ink gets in your blood, and it's gotten into my blood, but Claresholm's gotten into my blood. And to quote a mutual mentor of ours, or a role model, Peter Zosky, he always used to say Canada is his beat. Well, Claresholm and area, that's my beat.
That's fascinating, Rob. Now, let's talk a little bit about, because I've always been fascinated by you're a writer, you're a reporter at heart, but you're also the editor of the paper. Talk about the biggest challenge or challenges that you face as a newspaper guy, week in, week out, producing a quality newspaper for a community like Claresholm. What's the toughest part? What are the biggest challenges?
Well, it's a tough one. It's a lot of times it's not easy to. There are issues that can divide a community, and it's trying to ensure that, although editorially, in an editorial sense, on an opinion page, we may try and take a stand, but also, I was just talking to an official from Alberta Health this morning, and how we don't have an agenda. We don't sit there and I don't go into an event in advance with a quote unquote slant. My goal is always to just present the facts and allow people to decide. And so it's often interesting to be drawn in, or try to be drawn into issues where it's really not up to us to decide. It's just for us to decide, to present the information and let people decide. And often, because we report it, or I report it, people think I'm the one who's saying those things, and I'm not. So I'm very reluctant when someone asks me, are you saying that the town is, and I'm like, I'm actually not. It's not me. You need to talk to the mayor, or you need to talk to council, because they're the ones saying this. I'm just reporting what happened at that meeting, or just giving it the information. And so trying to navigate that is always very, very challenging, because we can't take sides per se, and I've been accused of doing that, and it's never been intentional. And if it is, then I don't know how to respond to that, because we've always tried to present both sides, because that's the nature of journalism.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the challenges. What's the best part? You and I sat over at Blackwood Coffee the other day on a very hot day, and you and I sat outside, and we were having coffee, and in that half hour or so that you and I were together having coffee on the sidewalk, I don't know, 15 or 20 people went by. Rob Vogt knew all 15 or 20 first names. Hi, how you doing? You probably know their family members and all of that. And I probably knew 3 or 4 of those. But now I don't live in the town, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you know pretty much everybody. I said that in the opening, and I meant it. That's got to be kind of one of the cool things about your job.
Well, it is. It's and that's another reason. Excuse me. That's drawn me to it, is the fact that it is. I remember when I was in university, I used to live in Kelsey Hall, and I had this friend who. Same thing. We would walk down the halls, and King of Kensington was still fresh from the CBC days, and he'd say, "You're like the King of Kensington. Everybody knows you." And they'd say,
"That's a good comparison.
You're the King of Kelsey Hall." So I sometimes, when I walk down the street, I that music is in my mind when he walks down the street.
I love that show.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And but that is one of the best things, is the ability, is that. And the interesting thing is, having said that, is when I was at a high school graduation last week, and and we were putting the pages together, and I was thinking back to when I was taking photos of the grads, because we hadn't been to last year's ceremony because it was closed to the public because of the pandemic. But I was at this graduation, and I would see every grad, and I was like, he was in the paper for this, she was in the paper for that, and I counted every single grad, all 42 or 44 of them, they'd all been in the paper, and I started thinking about, that's what we do. That is the great thing, is being able to touch all of these different communities within communities. Like going to meeting some of the clergy and talking to those leaders and realizing just how passionate they are about their faith, and then going to the agriplex and seeing someone just as passionate about riding bulls, and then going to the schools and seeing not just the athletics, but also seeing a student get 100% on a diploma exam, and just knowing that that's 5 years ago, now that student's in marine biology, and the one aspect is seeing all that progression, and seeing those people from basically birth until they leave this community, and that's amazing, and that's just awesome. But also just that connection. And when my dad died, that was probably the most defining moment of being a member of this community, in that the number of people who reached out and sent cards and well wishes, and all, never met him, because my dad just was already older when I was even a teenager, so he didn't really venture out too much. But just that's unparalleled level of support was just what I think defines what I get out of this job. That's one of the benefits, is the fact that it's so much of it is professional, and I still get that when I walk into a room, people are quiet because I think it's gonna end up, whatever they say is gonna end up in the paper, and after 20 years that still happens, and that's fine, and I understand that. But there's also this other element of, like I say, this support. And my mom went through some challenges, and a lot of people, again, just stopped me and said, "How's your mom doing?" And those things are just priceless. They're just, it's what it's all about. That is the biggest benefit.
Well, I hope that you understand as well the benefit that you are to this community.
Wow.
Because it's huge, and it came to light again as I was planning this year's Canada Day celebration, and we were trying to attract volunteers, number one, and entertainers, number two. So we did some things, the little Claresholm town little box in the newspaper, and we we were out there with posters and kind of trying to attract folks, and it was okay. We'd get one or two, and then Rob Vogt writes his story in the Claresholm paper about the upcoming Canada Days, and we're looking for volunteers, we're looking for entertainers. Bang! The phone starts to ring. And that speaks to me that, hey, people, first of all, read Rob Vogt, and they also value what you say and what you write. And I hope you understand that, because you're a huge part of this community, a huge asset to this community. There is almost nothing that happens in this town that you're not there, you're part of. And not only do you observe all of that and write about it, but very often you're part of it because you are there. And I just hope that you understand and understand our appreciation of what you do for Claresholm. It's huge.
Well, thank you for that. My spouse, Marcella Snell, often says that too. She's my biggest supporter and my biggest, she's my rock. But she's the one who says that to me virtually every week, is that you don't understand that. So over time, it's slowly sinking in what she says. So I really appreciate those words.
Well, they're heartfelt for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the future. Do you have any plans beyond Claresholm, or is this the plan? We certainly hope so. But are there other things out there that? I know you and I have talked about creative writing in addition to your journalistic writing, and what other things are coming up for Rob in the years ahead?
Well, the biggest thing is my family history. I made a promise when one of my uncles, he passed away, and at the celebration of life, I made a promise to write our family history. And as I said to my mom several times, it was her older brother who passed away, and I said to my mom, I'm going to do this, but I want to make some money doing it too. And she kind of laughed and she goes, you should, you absolutely should. So my vision is I would like to share the immigrant experience, and using my own family as a kind of a prism to look at that through. And I'm slowly, it's coalescing in my mind how I want to do that. But I also know it's a race against time because since my uncle passed away, my dad passed away, another relative passed away. My mom has dementia now. So, but luckily I got some advice from Ray Trimble, who used to be the chair of the museum board here, and she said, when you're doing family history, get their voices on recording. So I did that, and I have 3 hours of my mom's, and 3 hours of my dad's. So I didn't miss the boat. As usual, we all have those when we get to a point in life where a parent or a grandparent has passed away, and we go, I really wish I would have known, And so I don't have that many regrets because I did, and then I listened to my mom, an hour of her recording, and I went, you know what, I actually got a lot of this. I did actually ask all those questions. So quite a bit of information on Bridgeland in Calgary where she was living, so which I know you're familiar with. But so that family history is a big one. I have an uncle, my mom's younger brother, and I see him regularly. During COVID, we were his caregivers, so we were allowed to see him even when the lockdown was in place. So I've been picking his brain as well. And he has a slightly different perspective, so that's been good. And then I've always got stuff percolating, like writers, right? We've always got ideas. I've written a few novels that I'd like to polish up and maybe try and shop those around. I write a blog about the 80s called Rob Vogt 80s. And that's just for me. But as I connect with guys I went to high school with and people I went to high school with, I'm discovering that it's a little more universal than I initially thought. And so I get a lot of interesting comments from that. A lot of it is, what I've always said was, I don't think you have to live in a city to do what we do, right? The writing I want to do, I will do after I leave the local press, because that is just one stop on the writing journey, which is going to happen until I pass away, because that's just what we do, right? I was thinking about this the other day, in anticipation maybe of one of your questions about how did I end up as a journalist, and I honestly think it comes from the immigrant experience and the fact that when my family came to Canada, they didn't speak English, so they spent so much time observing and on the outside looking in and always trying to fit in by figuring out what it was. Like my dad, when I asked him, how do you learn English? He goes, slowly, one word at a time. But it was from observation and always observing. And couple that with the fact that they were storytellers around the kitchen table every Sunday at noon, these amazing stories. And I'm pretty sure that's where those two things have kind of coalesced into what I am. It's that observation on the outside look, and I'm not saying outside is a bad word, but just observation from the outside looking in and describing that, because that's how they survive. That's how they learn the language, learn the culture, My dad, he taught himself English, and then, by the time he retired, he was navigating paying the GST, and anybody who can navigate any federal government regulations, that's like a third language he's learned, right? So, but that was all from observation and kind of just how to suss things out and figure things out, and I think that's where I came from, and in a roundabout way to answer your question, that's the other reason I want to do my family history, is to pay tribute to all of that. The fact that part of it, whether that was intentional or not, may be the biggest gift that they gave me, was those two skills. So,
Well, Rob, it's been absolute delight, as I knew it would be, chatting with you. And I am so proud that you were able to show your mom that you can make money as a writer. You've done it, and congratulations for that. So that was our conversation, ladies and gentlemen, with Rob Vogt, of course, the editor of the Claresholm Local Press and one of Claresholm's first citizens. Absolutely a delight to have him here today. You can see this conversation again, of course, on our YouTube channel for the Claresholm Public Library, along with all of our other In Conversations as well. And we've got got some amazing guests, as we had today with Rob Vogt. Rob, all the best to you. Thanks again for being with us. I'm David Paulson, everybody. So long for now. We'll see you next time.